There we go.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Terri Suntjens. I am from Satellite Cree Nation, and I am the Director of Indigenous Initiatives with MacEwan University. And we are very excited to be hosting this session with Dr. Michael Yellowbird. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague here, Amber, to introduce herself.
Hello, Danse. My name is Amber Dion, and I'm from the MacEwan Cree Nation here in Treaty 6. And I'm an assistant professor with MacEwan University School of Social Work. And I too am very excited to be hosting this event with Blue Quills University and in partnership with Blue Quills University, and so excited to have Dr. Michael Yellowbird join us this evening. So exciting. As many of you may or may not know, we had an episode on Two Crees in a Pod with Dr. Michael Yellowbird. That was our first season that Michael joined us. And we had such an amazing conversation that we thought about we still think about, and we still have lots of questions. And so, again, really excited. Terri and I, both with a social work background, have used Michael's work in our work. And so again, we're just really thrilled to have Dr. Michael Yellowbird join us this evening.
And so, as Amber mentioned, we are doing this session in collaboration with the University of Blue Quills. And so we are going to start first by a song by Leo and Priscilla McGilvery. We'll need the sound. So that song actually was recorded last Thursday with the Department of Music at MacEwan University. We're currently creating an Indigenous meditation album with Dr. Darlene Auger, myself, and we have a number of Indigenous community members, including Priscilla and Leo McGilvery, Muriel Lee, and Joel Wood and Fawn Wood, who are contributing to this meditation. So that resource will be available in the coming weeks for free. And so we want to make sure that we are creating an accessible resource available for students, for our public, and for our people.
It's going to be really great. I'm so excited. And so without further ado, we are going to quickly introduce Dr. Michael Yellowbird. He is the Dean of Social Work over at the University of Manitoba. And so Dr. Michael Yellowbird, please introduce yourself in whichever way you would like for our listeners.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate the invitation to be here tonight and to talk about some of my work. I just want to say in my language, Nawa, did you wag on ho, dish to do, Nawa di wagan on it to one sakadich, ahcâhk. So in my language, I greet everyone and ask for goodness around all of us and keep our minds and hearts on the right road. And I'm really happy to be here tonight from Treaty 1 territory over in Winnipeg and University of Manitoba. I am a member of the 3 affiliated tribes, the Mandan, ahcâhk, and Rikara from North Dakota. And I've been here about a year and a half now in my current position. A lot of the work that I do these days is focused on primarily decolonization and looking at different ways to decolonize. And I do a lot with a term and a concept that I created called Neurodecolonization, which brings in mindfulness practices, contemplative practices to be able to get ourselves to decolonize from trauma. And I've created some practices for that and borrowed from some of the old stuff, from the mainstream. But that's pretty much what I do these days. So I'll just say that much. And if folks have questions about any more of my background, please let me know.
Awesome. And so we are going to dive into a PowerPoint, correct, Michael?
Yes. Yep.
And so just a quick reminder for folks who are tuning in, you have an opportunity to type any questions into the question or into the chat, the Q&A chat. And we will get to those questions for sure. I think that we are going to just be mindful of ensuring that Michael has time to go through all of the great information that he's prepared for us. And then we'll have some questions. You can ask Michael some questions.
All right, so it looks like the PowerPoint is up. I hope everyone can see it. If you can't, just put something in the chat and let us know. The title, Decolonizing Mindfulness and Transformations, is really a big part of the work that I do in terms of helping advise and work with Indigenous communities in particular about how to heal from trauma and how contemplative practices like mindfulness can be very helpful. This first slide is a picture of my oldest daughter. And she is, of course, meditating behind our house. This is before I moved to Winnipeg. We lived in Fargo. I was the director of Tribal and Indigenous Studies there. But I've been practicing meditation for a long time, sort of what they call the mainstream mindfulness meditation, but also grew up around a lot of ceremony where mindfulness and contemplative practices has really been a big part of who we are as Indigenous people. So the term mindfulness shouldn't throw you off like it's something new. It's something our cultures have been doing for a long, long time. So let's go to the next slide, please. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm trying to accomplish. This here is my grandfather. His name is Sitting Bear. So he goes a few generations back. He was our hereditary chief of the Rikara people. So he's always keeping an eye on me. So I make sure I speak right, do right. So what I want to talk about tonight is a bit about the medicine wheel and how I've tried to update it with traditional, indigenous, and Western knowledge and science. And I bring those two things together, and how the medicine wheel can be used now to help us decolonize ourselves and guide us toward personal and community justice and wellness and healing. What I want to kind of emphasize, of course, is that our indigenous ancestors had particular ways of living. And I really want to underline the fact that they were correct in their worldviews. We know that now when we start to look at Western science, how Western science is circling back all the time. And I'll show you many examples tonight of how that's happening, about the way they lived, how they practiced healing themselves, how they created community. And of course, how living like a Westerner can be very hazardous to our health. I also want to share a number of terms in neuroscience. I'll share a little bit of microbial science, some genetic and epigenetic terms, but all how they're related to mindful decolonization and also the practice of decolonization. Okay, next slide, please. So the way I approach decolonization and how I think about, how we heal is first from the brain, right? I think, and I've created the term neurodecolonization. And what I mean by that is decolonizing the mind and the body. It's concerned with really the effects that any of us have from any trauma, but in particular, I'm talking about colonial trauma as well, because that's an additional layer, that's an ongoing layer that continues to peak and spike trauma in many people. But what has it done to the brain's structure and function? And now we have really good science, really good evidence, besides seeing depression and anxiety disorders, and we see all the poor health outcomes. But now we can really take a look down and decolonize the molecular colonization that's gone on, or the cellular colonization that's gone on in the body from the stress, the chronic stress, and from the colonialism, how it affects gene expression. What does it do to our immune system? And also, as I mentioned earlier, our gut biome, where we have a great circle of life that lives there as well. We have all these trillions of different kinds of bacteria and virus and fungus and all these different kinds of things, we may, turn up our nose at, but we realize when we look at them, they're a continuation of us in many ways, because they are one of the things that can really help us or hurt us. And so we want to make sure that if we're living in a traditional manner and we're staying with our traditional foods and our lifestyle and good relations, keeping our stress down, sleeping well, all these different things I'll talk about tonight, those different populations, they're like a whole ecology inside of us stay healthy as well. So that's something that, now we can take a look at and really come to understand that really well. Next slide, please. So, neurodecolonization, I've looked at it a number of different ways and talked about it. But really, again, what is it? It's looking at the brain, the body in a colonial context. What's happening? And how that if we engage in traditional indigenous mindfulness practices, what can they do to purify, restructure, and decolonize and heal the mind and body to overcome the damaging effects of colonialism? And there's plenty. And I want you to be really impressed, because I think what our ancestors did is very, very impressive. So decolonization, of course, refers to these activities that weaken colonization at all of its different points, and facilitate a really intelligent, healthy resistance, create opportunities for us to promote our traditional practices in present day settings. And again, I'll get to that, why that's so important. These are my two daughters at the bottom, by the way, and they were when they were little meditating. So it's really important for us to remember this, and we've heard this many times from our ancestors about how we're connected to everything. But I want to just, again, underline this point that our brains, our genes, our microbes, our cellular molecular systems and processes, and our lifestyles, the communities that we live in, and our health that we have, we inherited from our ancestors, but also it really is affected by our relationship we have in our environment. And I try to capture that in the medicine wheel. I know medicine wheel has been done many times, and it's to me, it's a very beautiful discussion that happens when I see people talking about the medicine wheel. So I'm taking my crack at it. So not only are medicine wheels sacred hoops, but all they really amount to is this connection with harmony and balance, peaceful interactions among all things on earth, and representing these really important cycles, birth all the way to rebirth, right? And of course, there are the four cardinal or semi-cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, or in my tribe, the southeast, southwest, northwest, and northeast. You know, we really have to be different, I guess, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, this is what we have. But all the directions have their own teachings and representation of all forms of life. So when you go back to that, I think in the new science, at some point, people are going to look at this medicine wheel and say, wow, captured in here are all these different ideas, all these different species and flora and fauna and ideas that exist in these different parts of the medicine wheel. And people are going to see that it's a very holistic model. And of course, it's representation, you know, of these fundamental elements that we need as people: air, water, fire, earth, and the connecting points that we have. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I want to just show you a quick example of the medicine wheel on Turtle Island. To me, I've been looking at this and doing some research and reading and finding a lot of really important information. So next slide, we want to take a look at the medicine wheel on Turtle Island. Next slide, please. So this is probably the oldest medicine wheel in North America that we know of right now. It's about 10,000 plus years old. It's in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. And what's really interesting about this is that, next slide, you can, if you were taking a drone's look, you could see it from here, and you can imagine just for a moment, all these tribes, all these tribal people coming from all the four quarters. And they're meeting at this crossroads of this place where they're understanding their connection to the cosmology of the world, the birth of life, where they're spending time, they're praying here. But also, if you look all around the side of the hill and the forest, where it's very ancient, people were camped here. They were exchanging information, exchanging, you know, materials, ideas, innovations, inventions, and of course, exchanging genetic material. You know, when young people or middle-aged people would fall in love, they would have, of course, they'd be spreading the genes around. So when you look at Indigenous people now, you realize that, you know, we're all very diverse, but also that we probably had, I think, 4 to 6 common mothers that DNA shows us. You know, that we've had all these, we have these commonalities, so that we're not so far apart. You might say that there were 6, you know, sisters, Indigenous 6 sisters, or 4 of them. I forget exactly the number that's been quoted, but all sort of incorporating this, what they call moral convergence and understanding of the world, where the idea of circles and connection to the earth and to the cosmos and to one another, you know, is very, very fundamental. And this is the place they call the place where, you know, where the eagles sing or scream. So this would be an eagle's viewpoint. Next slide, please. So people come here yet today, and they leave different kinds of things, you know, out of respect and out of acknowledgement. Next slide. Dream catchers, feathers, tobacco, sacred colors. And you can see this is, you know, evidence that Indigenous people are coming here and still offering, you know, their prayers and making communication with this ancient medicine wheel and the life that still lives in it, right? The people that were there still in the rocks, right? I think these rocks are 10,000 years old or older that are just sitting there. Okay. So if we look at it, we say, wow, look at all these prayer flags here. All these people, all these different tribes coming here, putting up their prayer flags. And then if you fast forward, or if you go forward again, you'll see that it is a very close connection to Buddhists, where these colors have significance and meaning in terms of connection and prayer. And we can see that, you know, Buddhist people are also at one time very Indigenous people, close to the earth, and people, a culture that, you know, was very integrated, you know, with contemplative practices. Next slide, please. If you kind of move down to the plains area, now it's really kind of all over, then you'll see where sun dances are held. And again, the same idea, where people are putting these flags up with their prayers and the tobacco in them, and sending them out, not for their families necessarily, but many, many people put these up, just like the Buddhists do, in order to keep the world in balance. And these are prayers that are offered for those less fortunate than ourselves who are there, who are sacrificing and giving of ourselves in this ceremony, so that these prayers hover in the air around us, they hover in the universe. And all we have to do is take in this sacred breath and we breathe in those prayers, because they've been made and offered in a good way, just very selflessly, Next slide. So we began to see this same medicine wheel sort of replicate at different places. Let's go next slide. This is at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. I was a professor at the University of Kansas there. Haskell Indian Nations was just right down the road. I went out there many times, but it's so amazing when you go out there how it was a residential school at one time, how the students and the faculty administration sort of imagine this place, which is interesting because that's one of the themes of the talk tonight is reimagine, and they reimagine this, and of course brought in different things, right? From the left side there at the top, you can see that water bird, which is relevant or related to southern tribes, and you can see the like the teepees at the top, these geometric patterns, of course the circular patterns, and see people out there. So people are out here continually praying, making offerings, just like our ancestors were doing 10,000 or more years ago in the Bighorn Mountains. Okay, next slide, please. This is a really interesting rock, and I'll show you in just a minute why I brought it, but this is called Juticula Rock. And Juticula Rock is in Callaway, North Carolina, in Cherokee country. I was invited there a few years back to go and talk about some of the work that I'm doing around mindfulness and neurodecolonization. And so the elders, I had a few words with the elders, and they took me out to this rock. It's a rock that's been around a long time, and they wanted to show it to me and talk about it with me. Next slide. So when we got out there and you get a closer look, you'll see all these carvings that are in there. I mean, it's just amazing when you think about that, how 3,000 years ago, during the late archaic period, and even maybe longer than this, that tribes from all over Turtle Island were on the East Coast too, and they were leaving symbols of who they were, their calling cards. So look at that. You can see right in the center is the one I like to draw attention to. The being kind of walking up the path there with a child. That's how I read it. And he's got the suction cups on his head. Who knows what that means? Maybe bringing in that information from the cosmos into the brain. I like to think of that in terms of mindfulness. As that person moves up, and every time he hits a dot or runs into an interesting looking creature, that's what life is about, and it has its twists and turns and stops until it kind of goes out of sight onto the high part of the rock. And then you look at other things, that are, that look like. There's one. I'm sorry, I can't point at it, but it's on the left side, right? But the one looks like a shield, and you see it looks like a little blob there. It could be, it could be a virus for all we know, But who knows? Maybe they intuited or they understood these things and the nature of these kinds of things, So as you span around, you see all kinds of creatures on here, all kinds of symbols. You get to the far right side. What do you see? What I see is I see a turtle, and I see a medicine wheel. I see Turtle Island. 3,000 years ago, Indigenous people during the late archaic period were seeing this connection in the world, right? And they're seeing all these things come together. I'm not sure what the dots mean in there. But everyone I've showed it to, everyone says it looks like a turtle, and that's what the Cherokee elders were telling me. It sure looks like a turtle to us. Okay. So it's a very sacred rock. It's been around for many, many years, and I wanted to show that because this idea of the medicine wheel, has a long history. It's not just something someone created, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's thousands of years ago, maybe even longer. Next slide, please. Here you see it on the far left side there on a pictograph on a rock, and above that, this is out in the desert, by the way, in the in the States. Next slide. You see another one in Utah. It looks a lot like the medicine wheel on the far right, the wheel with spokes. Right? It's the same thing as that medicine wheel. Again, you're starting to see this crop up, happen at different places. Next slide. This is my own reservation. 3 affiliated tribes going across a bridge there, and this is the Missouri River under there. So you see this medicine wheel that was built on the side of a hill. So this is my reservation, and this happened in the 90s. Young people after Sundance got together and they made this medicine wheel. I was one of those young people back in the 90s, and we did this, you know, after a Sundance. Next slide, please. So let's get to colonization then and talk a bit about colonization, you know, just quickly here. When I think of colonization, I think about an unwelcome intrusion or invasion, just like colonialism or settler colonialism, or any ideas that come in that are unwelcome ideas. Something like a contagious virus like COVID-19 can also be a unwelcome intrusion, and it invades your body, invades your space. Could be ideas, could be a way of life, could be values that are brought into your community, that are forced upon you. And the next phase is contamination. Some of the ideas, like some of the viruses, are toxic. They're harmful when they come into contact with people who have developed a way of living with an environment in a very reciprocal way. When you start introducing new things like invasive species, it can have a very damaging effect on the indigenous people, the indigenous flora and fauna, and the environment. At a certain point, too much toxicity then creates an infection that can get overwhelmed. You know, it can overwhelm the immunity and the resistance. And of course, we see that, you know, with the different fish species that are brought in from different parts of the world that invade the lakes or the waters or the rivers, or different trees that invade and choke out the indigenous trees, or the plants, you know, that all get wiped out because of farming, monocropping, and all those kinds of things. And then sickness begins to set into the land, to the people, to the plants, to the animals, to, you know, to all these different kinds of things. At some point, those that survive the first 3 stages of colonization become colonized. The ideas, the values, the viruses, or maybe it's the virus that comes from COVID-19 become part of their life, and they carry that virus within them. The ideas of the viral ideas or beliefs or values, or the actual virus itself, become part of our lives. We are no longer overwhelmed, and we can still function and thrive yet, you know, within this colonial context. And in fact, in the human context, sometimes there are those who are colonized that then help maintain the colonizing patterns, right? So one of the things I always use, since my background is in health, I always use the concept of diabetes, right? If you bring in an unwelcome intrusion of you change people's diets and their menu, and they get contaminated by eating fast foods or eating unhealthy levels of sugar and refined, you know, processed foods, you know, it contaminates the body, and the body gets overwhelmed at some point, and then you develop diabetes. And so if you don't die from diabetes, the reason is you get insulin. You don't change your diet, you don't go back to your traditional foods, you don't go back to your traditional life, you stay colonized by taking insulin. And that's how colonization works in that context. So there's many other examples. Okay, let's go on. So what do we do then? Well, then we move into decolonization. First is a cleansing period that has to happen for every one of us that gets enlightened to the idea that, you know, I'm colonized. I need to strip away these harmful ideas and practices and beliefs and invasive thoughts that I have that have been imposed by colonizing structures that are making me sick, that are creating sickness in my community, that are making us ill, that are reducing our life expectancy or giving us chronic diseases and disorders, right? Why do we have so much suicide? Why is there such low life expectancy, right? Because we still have these invasive beliefs and thoughts that are still there and still being imposed. So once we start, you know, scrubbing ourselves and begin to strip those away, then we move into what I call the Renaissance period. The Renaissance is the idea that, you know, we're going to recover. We're going to restore cultural practices, beliefs, values that were taken away or abandoned during colonization. But as you'll see, many of them are relevant and necessary for survival and well-being today. So that's the Renaissance. Finally, the Enlightenment period. You know, and these are all, of course, they're all connected together. The Enlightenment period then is for us then to use new ideas and birth these new ideas, thinking, technologies, and lifestyles that contribute to the advancement and the empowerment of Indigenous people. That's what I talk all about. So one concept, you know, here is the idea of a technology. We're using a technology now to spread, you know, this conversation out. And it's something that can be very useful to us, right? So if you can imagine that the Enlightenment period was when these tribal people, these Indigenous people, 10,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago on the East Coast were coming together at Juticula Rock, or 10,000 years ago were coming together around this in the Bighorn Mountains. They were having periods of enlightenment there at that point. They were birthing new ideas and new technologies by interacting with one another, talking to one another, contributing prayers, songs, ideas, innovations, language, whatever it was, to increase, you know, this empowerment of all people, because there's certainly a much stronger connection recognized. Next slide, please. So push it for advance for four slides, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is my model here, the medicine wheel, or the medicine wheel with some of my language and ideas put into it. I call it a holistic approach to neurodecolonization, mindfulness, and community health. Something I've been working on for a while, but I finally just kind of put it all together a couple of years ago. So the idea of the medicine wheel is here, right? And the mind, body, spirit, and emotion, sometimes people change those around, but I use those to know now that the mind has these amazing capacities to change, and that's called neuroplasticity. Our mind has this amazing, amazing power to change its structure and function by just thinking good thoughts, or saying prayers, or having gratitude, or feeling a sense of hope and optimism. We also have this opportunity every day, all the time, to grow new brain cells, neurogenesis, which again protect us from neurodegenerative diseases, brain disorders, and things like Alzheimer's. If we move down to the next sector below that, the next quadrant, that's what I was talking about, the human microbiome. I won't have enough time to talk about that tonight, but I'll just mention again, should not just think of the body as being our body and physical. We have trillions of species of bacteria, good bacteria, and some harmful bacteria that live inside of us. If we balance our bacteria, we have so many species that we've inherited from our ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago. Things like what they call the phytobacterium, which are bacteria that help us live longer, be leaner, be stronger, help balance our moods and our emotions, right? Because bacteria, this great circle of life, exerts a very, very powerful influence on our emotions and our mental health and our physical health, right? It's not just us. It's like a mother. You tell a mother, don't smoke, don't drink, because you're going to hurt the baby. You know, it's the same thing. Don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, don't eat sugar, those kinds of things, because you're going to hurt your microbiome. They're like a trillion babies there, and if you feed them well, they will take care of you. So we have a trillion other babies to worry about, right? But even men have the babies too now. As we slide over to spirit, those are the contemplative practices, you know, that we do. And finally, the last quadrant here is, you know, our emotions. You know, again, they're all connected. Genetic and epigenetic inheritance is so important, we're finding out today. In fact, affect us at the molecular level. The molecules and the cells in our body and the genes in our body are affected by, you know, our mind, our body, our spirit, and our environment. So essentially, that's really what this whole thing is all about, is that everything we experience, if you have a lot of gratitude, you practice gratitude all the time, your brain will change and develop neural pathways to have pathways of gratitude, right? therefore enhancing different important chemistry in the mind, things like dopamine, serotonin, all these feel-good norepinephrine, kind of alertness, all those different really important chemicals. So on the left side, on the lower one, my contention is this, and I think it's well proven now with some of the research I'll show you, is that in order to balance all of these different quadrants here, a return to traditional practices is essential. Things like movement, sleep, laughter, all the way down to being outdoors are things that are fundamental to who we are and fundamental to our ancestors. I mean, our ancestors a few hundred years ago wouldn't even recognize this because they were very, very different in terms of their movement, their sleep, the number of times I'm sure they laughed a day and how they hung out together, and so on. Let's go on next slide, please. So molecular colonization happens, I think, at a very, very deep level. I don't think it does. I know it does. It can be very, very deep. When we have a very disturbing experience, like a personal one can be, the death of a child, God forbid. And for mothers, it's even, and I'll get to that later. I think I have that slide in here, and I'll talk a bit about why it's even much more difficult on mothers. And now what we know about the connection between babies and mothers that happen, when there's an exchange of cells between them. But trauma can colonize the mind and the body. Next slide, please. The first thing that it's important to remember is take care of your stress. Take care of your stress. Because even if you have low levels of stress, that's still chronic stress. And I call it enzymatic colonization because the enzymes that operate in the body can also be colonized. And what we see here is that we see this picture of these dendritic spines. It looks like little spines with these outshoots, outgrowths of them, and spinogenesis where they grow new ones when we get more information, right? I would say language speakers who can speak more than 2 or 3 languages probably have a lot more spinogenesis going on. People that can do play instruments or dance or do all these other kinds of things probably have more spinogenesis. But the point of this particular slide is that when chronic stress is in our lives that comes from colonial stress, not just regular stress, but I'm talking about another layer of feeling unsafe, feeling fearful, feeling oppressed, feeling the hate crimes, feeling the pressure of being a person that's been marginalized beyond the margins. Brain chemicals then begin to flood the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain. And there's a protein called kinase C that then begins to break down these little dendritic spines in the cortex. And that's not good because these spines are connected to learning, memory, balance, and fine motor skills. Right? And it's so important for us to have these novel sensory experiences that promote this growth. Right? I say don't do the same thing over and over again. Don't eat the same food over and over again. Don't tell the same joke over and over again. Vary it. And this is what people are discovering, and why I think Indigenous people had contraries. They call them, well, heyokas, and they do things backwards. That was a lesson to the people. Do not get caught up in the same cycle. Do things differently. So you can see how brilliant that Indigenous people were because they invited that into their lives, right? We don't have enough contraries, right? Sometimes we do, but sometimes not. What we know about this then is that there are gender differences when you have acute stressful events, right? Like a loss of a child, for example. The spine density increases in the males when they have an acute exposure because they're protectors maybe, who knows, we don't know. But they have to have more reception going on so that maybe they can, fight against whatever it is that's invading. The females probably decrease their spine density and go into kind of a holding pattern to protect themselves and protect the children. Okay, this is now I'm theorizing this because I haven't seen any research on that, why that is. No one really knows. I'm looking at it in terms of, you know, what used to happen to people a long time ago, and we still carry those with us, right? The good thing about this is that chronic stress can be beat. Chronic traumatic colonial stress can be pushed back and resisted. And dendritic spines can regrow, and they can be repaired when we get back into traditional practices. One of the things that's very important to know, you see that last point there, is that they are resilience points against Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative diseases. So think about it for a second. When you read the literature, when you look at the old indigenous people back in the day, even hunter-gatherers today that continue to live a life that's very traditional, you're not going to find a very high level of cognitive disorders among those groups. You're not. There's no science that shows that. In fact, the science shows that in those communities and cultures, the degree of neurodegenerative diseases is significantly lower among the elders in those groups, like it would have been in our old people, you know, when they were traditionally living. For their chronic stress, for their traumas, they had ceremonies. And I don't know how many ceremonies we have anymore for that. Next slide, please. I wanted to show this slide here because I thought it was an important slide for all of us to think about. Those who believe in a higher power, that believe that, you know, maybe you don't even believe like a creator, like, you know, like some folks do. Maybe you just believe your ancestors are around you, and they can be with you and they can protect you, right? And that there are sacred spaces in our brain. Next, please. So we know that here in what they call the parietal lobe, the yellow lobe there, they call it the God spot. You know, some people. This is where it's not really a God spot. Next slide, please. But what it is that it's a spirituality zone. If you have a belief in a higher power, like I said, it doesn't have to be a creator or a God. It could be like, you know, you could believe in you know, the power of, you know, the great mystery. You know, there's a lot of tribes that didn't believe in a God like that. They just said the great mystery, right? There's a God up in heaven or whatever. That's kind of more recent invention. I think when Christians asked indigenous people, where's your God? What do you mean? What is it? You know, it's up in heaven. Someone that created everything. Oh, okay, like a creator, okay. So I think they kind of got into that kind of language. But it was, I think for most of them, you know, you could, I would say that more agnostic, that they recognize that there's this power that moves things, right? And they see it in all things. It's not just one being, but it's all these things that exist. But this is where it's happening. It's happening in this part of the brain. The belief in a higher power, though, is what is called an evolutionary asset. If you believe in something higher that's connected to you, or something, maybe it's lateral and it's all around you, right? Maybe that's where indigenous people think it's circular. Maybe not, it's a higher than you, but it's around you. You know, it's there. That part of the brain is going to activate. The key thing that I found in looking at the research is that believing in a loving God or the love that surrounds you is much more important than believing in a God of retribution. Because what it does is it activates, a loving God activates that God spot. And that spot is about compassion and love. And it's not only about compassion and love, but it's about accepting all things. It's about love that tree, love that water, love that air, love those clouds, love that grass. When you think of that kind of connection, it's very different than someone who believes in a God that's going to get you and burn your ass in hell. It's true, because a different part of their brain lights up, and that's fear. Then they start to fear the waters. They fear the forest. They fear the people. They fear all these different kinds of things, right? So when you look at, again, a lot of indigenous people around the world, there wasn't this kind of understanding or idea that there was a God that was going to get you, but it was take care of things, love things, right? And when you do that, you create and you enhance this sacred space in the brain, this spirituality zone. Okay, next slide, please. This is what I was talking about earlier. about colonization. And of course, we know now that there are sacred and safe spaces, you know, in mom, right? And there's a thing called the fetal maternal microchimera. And machira is this legendary creature, right? That was all these different animals, right? And so what this means is that the scientists call it cellular invasion. I call it cellular connection or overlap. Means that the mothers carry this unique genetic material from their children's bodies, you know, that after the child's born, it's still there. For example, when you see the bullet point number 2, when their study was done of these women in their 70s, some were even 80s later, half of them still carried the DNA in their brains of their sons who were in their wombs. So the mother may have had a child at 20 years old or 18 years old, 52 or 50 years later, she was still carrying those alive cells in her brain. And the cells were still talking to mom. Take care of me. Love me. Protect me. So think about that for a moment, how profound that is. Right? So when you think about the stress that must have happened when mothers lost a child, not only was that child gone physically, but if the science is correct, that cell was still talking to mom. See? So when children were taken, put into residential schools, we can only imagine now what was happening at a cellular level and how inhumane, how barbarian that kind of practice was. Right? So the last bullet point, and it's important to remember that, you know, this is not just like something we make up, something that we know. So it's another thing too. I think sometimes when, you know, you see adult kids, adult children, maybe you see a son, 50-year-old, and his mom still can't let him go. You know, that's what may be happening. He's still, the cell's still saying, help me, take care of me. So, you know, that's a phenomenon we never understood until now. Here's another really interesting one, bullet point number 3. When the heart of the mother, let's say the mother has a heart event. She gets an injured heart, she has a heart attack. What we know now from the studies of these hearts, too, of these same women, I believe, the cells also go to the site of the injury on the heart, and they patch it up. They patch up mom's heart. And they're specialized cells. They know where to go. They know how to do that because it's survival for mom and the baby. Some of those cells even start the heart beating again, make the heart stronger. So these are things we didn't know now, but these are things you could almost be sure of that our ancestors knew about the connection between the mother and the baby, why that was such a sacred connection, and why, like people in my tribe had birthing lodges where the women would be, so they didn't see trauma or hear harsh words or those kinds of things, where they were treated, you know, with older women, and they were there spending a lot of time in the birth lodge so that the babies would be, you know, strong when they were born because of the high infant mortality. So again, this is a Smithsonian article from the science. It says manipulate. You can read it that way, or you can say there's this kind of cooperation between baby and mom. Okay. Next slide, please. So neurodecolonization, I think I mentioned already, you know, all these different things are happening. You know, perceptions and experiences change our brain's function. Past, present environment triggers and silences our gene expression. It activates different brain regions. Neurotransmitters and modulators are all altered gut biome, and this means a lot to our health. Next slide, please. If we're going to go down to the molecular level, then we can think about how chronic stress or a loving environment, a good environment, right? Or the good life, as some people say, help us at the molecular level. So we look at these red, little red ends on these chromosomes. You got the little young chromosome, then you got the grandpa chromosome there, holding his leg or his back or whatever that is. It's kind of a stereotype because there's a lot of us grandpas that are pretty strong yet, so pretty tough yet. So anyway, these are they protect the chromosomes from deterioration. Next, please. One more. And and it protects our genetic data, right? And it, as long as those are nice and long, most of us are not going to get cancers. We're not going to get, these aging diseases, right? But every time the cell divides, which is, all the time, and the whole cells are replaced after maybe 7 or 8 years, they say, in the body, telomeres get shorter. They get too short, the cells no longer divide, and they become, they become senescent. It's not really dead. It says or dies here, but senescent means they're just there. And when they're there, not doing anything, after a while, when they're senescent, and you're under a chronic stress, and these cells are just sitting in your body, you're colonized at that level, they start to emit toxins that create cancer. This is now known, through many, many different good studies. And as this shortening process goes, quicker, we develop, diseases of aging like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all these things. So a lot of people say they're like a bomb fuse, right? They're a bomb fuse, but we light the fuse, or colonization lights the fuse, because the more stress from colonization, the quicker it goes, and the quicker there's an explosion, and it does the damage. Next slide, please. Again, please. So this is a study that was done on middle-aged people with telomeres. Remember, telomeres should be nice and long, right? But this study says that middle-aged people who are physically active, and I'll call it movement, right? Because so we have a misunderstanding about exercise. Exercise is very novel. Our ancestors did not exercise. They didn't go to gyms. They were physically active all the time. Gardening, hunting, moving, gathering, playing games, dancing, celebrating, doing ceremony, activity. No one was doing CrossFit like we do today. No one was doing, going to the gym, lifting weights, right? And so the body was reading that as physical activity, longer telomeres than people who don't move. Very, very, very rare for someone in a tribal community to not be moving unless they were elderly and had some kind of disease, or, were very old. Even then, people were moving. Those who move have telomere lengths that are similar to people that are much younger in this particular study. Also, this is the kind of catch piece here. The other study says that telomere lengths are short for people who are depressed and healthy. Get that? They're depressed. They're short. Even there's other people that are very healthy, but both are showing chronic stress, right? Doesn't matter how much you go to the gym and you work out, lift weights. If you have chronic stress, your telomeres are getting shorter. This is why movement and some of the things I'll talk about in just a bit makes so much sense. And not only does it, affect you, at the level of depression and shortened telomeres, but then it raises things like cortisol in your body, the adrenaline-like factor that's fight or flight, and regulation. I remember my cortisol dysregulation, a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety years and years ago. Didn't know what to do with it, and just felt like I had to run all the time. So I moved quite a bit. Now it's gone, because I returned to a much more traditional way of living. So, and again, once you have this disturbed cortisol regulation, where you feel like, you can't breathe well, your mind is racing, you're constantly revisiting these images in your brain. It could be about anything. It could be about a past trauma, or it could be about someone else's trauma that you're sort of, rolling around in your brain. Your brain is still reading that as chronic stress. Doesn't even have to be your stress. It can be someone else's stress, and you can be infected with that stress. You can roll around your brain. Think of that. Your molecular system's getting colonized by someone else's story. Next slide, please. Okay, next. So what we know about telomeres in kids and children is that it's really, really important to understand that, for kids, that if they're in a stressful situation, telomeres shorten. In this particular study, the kids living in the most stressful environments, or communities for that matter, have shorter telomeres. In this study, 40% shorter than those who live in the most loving and nurturing settings. So imagine that now today when we see that in communities where a community is unsafe, where there's not a lot of love and compassion and shown to children, right? And there's fear from the outside or even the inside. This is why now we know today that allowing hate crimes, allowing this kind of oppression is really a crime against humanity, because those children that get these shorter telomeres, we're making little old people out of them. They're going to get the diseases of aging much, much earlier, right? And they're going to die much earlier. Next slide, please. We also know that this connection between mom and the babies, that overweight moms give birth to biologically older children, right? Something that wasn't happening back in the day, right? You wanted people to have the right kind of fat, not the belly fat, or not the kind of fat that folks have today. Mothers, this is really important to remember, because again, this is an epigenetic thing where your genes get expressed. That if you're exposed to stress, hate, missing and murdered Indigenous women, if you're exposed to fear, feelings of unsafety, all these life factors are going to shorten the telomeres. You can pass those directly on to the baby. I've had my DNA analyzed several times. I've had my mother's DNA analyzed. My mother's 94 years of age, and she's still going pretty strong, but I can see in her telomeres, she's had a lot of trauma in her life as a young woman, as a child, but there are things that mediated, her trauma. And I'll talk that, if any people have questions, I can answer that later. Anyway, I looked at hers and I compared mine to hers, and I inherited a lot of those shorter telomeres. So, I have to watch out for all the diseases of aging too. So, which is why I live kind of differently than a lot of folks in my contemporaries. Let's go to the next slide, please. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. It's a big word. I know it's a neuroscience term, BDNF. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but when I first learned the term BDNF, I was thinking, how do I remember that? Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So I'm a runner, though. I still run. I run quite a bit. And I thought, well, when I run, of course, that's when I found out this BDNF increases your brain. So I used to think when I run that there was this, my acronym was Big Darn Native Fella in my brain. It was pouring this BDNF in my brain, making my neurons grow, right? So that's how I remembered it. So I used to imagine that running along, that there was this big native guy dumping in my brain that would help promote neuron growth, which is a good thing, because we need more neurons, to think, to feel, to express, to create, and prevent neurodegenerative diseases. And we don't want them to die. So this is really good to keep them from dying. And again, this is why you would see in Indigenous populations, you wouldn't see a lot of senility or a lot of brain disorders, because BDNF was probably quite high in those traditional cultures. Okay, next slide. So again. So this is a study that was done on mice. So I always say this when I do the talk. This bigger white, aggressive mouse was bullying the smaller Indigenous mouse. Then I've stopped. Oh, forgot. So, but it created the social stress for this small mouse, right? Biting him and chasing him around. And this prolonged stress of being bullied created an increase of the big darn native fella in the brain, who was pouring more of that on the little brown mouse's brain so it wouldn't die, right? And that's a good thing. but also it activates genes in the front part of the brain that produce high levels of social anxiety, withdrawal, and depression. So we kind of know what's happening with people now when they're bullied, when they're singled out, when they're bullied as a group or bullied as individuals. We see that's happening. And then further studies show that BDNF is doing its job, but there's also the signaling that's happening too with the social anxiety and these genes that also then create and participate in what they call this pathophysiology of depression and suicidal behavior. So now we know really where suicidal behavior is coming from. It's the lack of BDNF in the brain, or and of course the social anxiety and withdrawal from being stressed out too much. This story has an interesting line. Once the scientists took the little white mouse out of the brown mouse's cage and put him over another cage, they tested the little mouse again, but his BDNF was still high, so was his anxiety and withdrawal and depression. So then they covered his cage so the little brown mouse couldn't see him, but it still stayed high, his anxiety. So they thought, well, it must be because he hears him and smells him. So they took the little mouse out of the room and they sent him back to Europe. No, I'm just kidding. They sent him out, and then he couldn't smell him or see him anymore. And of course, he felt safe. So the BDNF kind of began to mediate, and his social anxiety and those different kinds of things began to smooth out. So this is really a big thing about safety. It's really about safety and social anxiety, and what happens when you're not safe in a colonial context. These are things, again, these are things that are happening in the colonization of the brain in this part. Okay. So decolonizing the mind here. I'm going to kind of whip through this as much as I can here. So let's go on to the next one. This is the practices. So, I say 12 mindfulness practices that can heal emotions, reset genetic expression, facilitate improved learning, language, all these different wonderful things. And of course, I call it the new old Indigenous social work, because the ideas that I'm talking about here are old for the people. But now so Western science is caught up and is saying, oh, wow, it's important to run and laugh and dance and sing and sleep well and all these different kinds of things, right? So if we go on to the effects of running, we see that in movement. I say running, but it's really about movement, getting your heart rate up and moving. Persistence running is in our heritage, means we used to run down our food, or we go and we pick our food rather than go to the grocery store. It not only improves our physical and mental health, but also our brain's working memory and processing speed, improves our brain's executive function, which is all about delaying gratification, avoiding distraction, and improving our brain's ability to be flexible, to move from one task to the next task to the next task, right? And we want to be able to do that. We also, again, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the big darn native fella, increases the miracle grow. It's called miracle grow for the brain. I think a guy by the name of John Rately, who is a neuroscientist, had written a book called Spark that he talks about what it does for the brain. Increases, the neurons that wire together, and of course, you get better and better at movement, And finally, this is a big one. The last bullet point shows that regular endurance exercise, like running for long, slow distances or moving for long, slow distances, causes adaptations in our metabolism called curcumin metabolism. And that really protects us from depression by increasing our skeletal muscle, the curcumin aminotransferase, the CAT expression, right? So once we start moving, it's starting to increase this CAT, which shifts then this curcumin metabolism away from this toxic substance to the production of a more neutral curinic acid. This is why I would challenge any of you who do work out there with Indigenous people to make part of your work. If you want to deal with anxiety disorders and depression disorders, it's so important for people to move, because it's still in our genetic profile, it's still in our brain, we still have the neurochemistry, we still have the enzymatic chemistry and metabolism that's going to protect us from depression if we engage in these kinds of very traditional practices. There's no pill, There's no shot, there's no vaccine, there's no therapy that is as strong as something and is the most powerful and effective as something as this traditional movement is all about. Next slide, please. So that said, we get to dancing and singing. This is a really important slide because now we know this is something, I call it the old and new social work. This is something we can add to the new social work, something old, right? Dancing and singing. When you come upon all of the historical literature about Indigenous people, you're going to see a lot of singing, a lot of singing. If you ever go visit the Maori people in Aotearoa, you'll see, you hear a lot of singing, a lot of singing. If you visit tribes back in the day, a lot of dancing, a lot of dancing. So we know now from this really novel study that singing increases endocannabinoid concentrations in the brain, improves the mood. It's amazing, right? It's like one of those natural sort of medicines, again, natural medicine, traditional medicine for the brain and the body. Dancing improves the mood, cycling on the bike improves endocannabinoids as well. Singing, second paragraph, second sentence, the most beneficial activity, right? Because volunteers were recruited from local choirs already find this an enjoyable activity. What group of people can't you find in the world that love to sing the songs of their people, the traditional songs that make them laugh, make them smile, make them reflect, fill them with gratitude, are not going to feel good. And the more they sing, the higher levels of endocannabinoids that are released in the brain. So what do we know about this biochemical evidence? We know that these messengers improve the mood, reduce stress, anxiety, enhance memory. There it is again, protect the brain and function, and also reduce our pain. It's amazing. Something as simple as that. But these are things, remember, these are things that were first taken away in colonization. Some of the first things that were attacked and banned and prevented. No wonder you have all these, people that are trying to seek ways of using drugs or substances to raise their endocannabinoid levels to feel better, to reduce their stress and anxiety, to reduce their pain. I won't say protect their brain or enhance their memory. Those kinds of things have, a very different effect. But think about it for a second. We know now at a molecular level that these things are happening. Things we didn't know. Okay, next slide, please. Laughter, so important. Humor is in our genes. Those of us who come from collectivist culture are much more likely to have a higher frequency or number of people who love to laugh, tell jokes, who love to tease, love to smile, love to pull pranks, tell amusing stories, all those kinds of things, right? This particular study showed that, people with these short alleles, that's called a variance in a gene. So you've got a gene and you've got two variants in the gene, right? Those are the alleles you can have. They can be long alleles or short alleles, or they could be T's or A's or whatever they are. Those are the alleles that are in the gene. If you have a couple of copies of that, in the short alleles, you're going to laugh a lot more. You're going to do well in a positive environment where there's joking, there's laughter, there's smiling, there's teasing, those kinds of things. And no wonder that, among a lot of Indigenous cultures, teasing is such an important, and laughter is such an important part of social relationships. Telling stories. It's not just there because it's there because we evolved to have this humor. We evolved to have these alleles. People who do not have what I call the funny bone gene are generally from Western European countries, places like that. That's what the research shows. Longer alleles. They don't laugh as much. They're less sensitive to an environment where there isn't a lot of laughing or joking or funny stories that are being told. They're the serious folks, right? Got to be serious. So the last part you'll see here is that collectivist cultures, as I said, more likely to have people who carry the funny bone gene. And which is, again, think about it. When people are taken from their homes and put into foster care, young Native children, or put into residential schools, or put into a building where there's no laughter, you can bet that it's an epigenetic change that's happening in them. And at some point, it'll bring chronic stress into their lives. Which is why we have to begin shifting practice to make humor and laughter a big part of our practice these days. One of the things I knew growing up is that, in the cultures way back in the day, people counted coup on things that hurt us, right? They laughed at things. They laughed at pain. They laughed at different kinds of things, right? They laughed at their hunger, so on. But from laughing, under Curly here, we see that, again, look at it, lowering cortisol, relaxing your blood vessels, protecting your brain, increases your BDNF. Next slide, please. Sleep, very, very important. This is the res dog at rest here, right? We know that we need to sleep. We know that our sleep has been colonized by Western society. It's even colonized Westerners' ability to sleep. Sleep deprivation is a major public health issue, in Western societies in particular. But when our circadian rhythm clock breaks down, when we're not getting up with the sun and going to bed with the sun goes down, we're increased risk for all these different things: heart disease, brain disorders, diabetes, and so on. We're colonized by all our different things, like we have our cell phones and whatever, screens. We know it's crucial for childhood, so it's good development. But what we should know, though, too, is that the last 2 bullet points, growth hormones are released when we're sleeping really well, when we're in a deep level of sleep, and infection-fighting proteins are released, which may be why a lot of elders now get COVID-19 and have a much more enhanced experience, much more difficult time with it. Maybe the sleep and their infection-fighting proteins are not being released. Also, dementias, as I mentioned, and affects memory and learning is difficult too as well. Next slide, please. So these are the circadian rhythms. I'm not going to talk too much about those, but if you just take a look at those, you'll see where the melatonin release stops, which is why a lot of tribal people, first thing they do is get up in the morning and go walk, stand out in the sun. Say a prayer to the sun, stand there for a while. It helps shut off the melatonin, so you're not sleeping the rest of the day. And at the end of the day, you'll see all these different things happening, where you have high levels of alertness and coordination and so on. And you want to do things at those points, right? And then, of course, when the technology use starts shutting off, maybe about 8 o'clock, and your melatonin release starts about that time. But it changes for all of us. And right now, for many of us, it's not functioning well because of artificial lights and not being outside enough. Okay, next slide, please. Let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to talk about this one. Let's go to the next slide too. So I said fasting. Again, if you've seen intermittent fasting kind of taking the Western world, and you see all these people talking about fasting, and I even got a fasting app on mine that I use, but I've been fasting for a long time. It's just kind of fun to use it. But think about it when I said earlier about the sense of humor. This is a Jesuit missionary, this Paul Lejeune, who was he was missionizing and proselytizing among these Indigenous hunter-gatherers in Canada in 1636. And he was writing in his, they hadn't eaten for a while, so he's writing in his journal, I saw them in their hardships and labor suffer with cheerfulness. And so he's watching these people, even though they haven't eaten for a long time, they're still working and, still cheerful. I found myself with them threatened with great suffering. They said to me, we shall be sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 and more without eating for lack of food, telling him to take courage, let thy soul to be strong, endure suffering and hardship, keep thyself from being sad, otherwise thou will be sick, right? Saying, stay, you're telling him to, man up or something, right? See how we do not cease to laugh, even though we have little to eat. So what's really incredible about this slide is that you're seeing that particular gene. I didn't call it the serotonin transporter gene. I call it the funny bone gene. The funny bone gene, the serotonin transporter gene, coming together with the humor to deal with the hardship. So we as Indigenous people sometimes don't deal with hardship with laughter. We take it very seriously, but that's not how we evolved. That's not how our ancestors evolved. They evolved to laugh at suffering. That's what kept them alive. That's what released endocannabinoids in their brains. That's what released, different kinds of chemistry like dopamine and serotonin levels that increased, as well as brain-derived neurotrophic factor that protected their brain. When they could laugh at their hunger, when they could laugh at the lack of what they didn't have or trauma that they've been through, they could heal. This is what our ancestors are telling us, we're strong, we're tough, we can get through this. But we haven't had that message filter down from them. But here it is, how they're telling us that you can endure suffering and hardship. We don't cease to laugh, even though things are really hard. So you see the benefit behind that. It's tremendous. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the benefits, improving glucose regulation, of course, losing abdominal fat, blood pressure goes down, maintain your muscle mass, all the way down to number 5, protection of neurons in the brain, right? Finally, Mark Mattson, who did this study, found that when you intermittently fast, like our ancestors did. My mother's 94. She said that when they were kids, they ate 1 or 2 meals a day all the time. They got all their calories in one meal. She said we never starved. She said we just ate one good sized meal and that was it, or we ate 2 smaller meals. And she said, it's not like people think. She said we ate a lot of garden vegetables. They grew a lot of garden vegetables. And she said we only had meat just a few times a week, right? Fish and meat a few times a week. Not like today, she said. And I think that's one of the things that kept her brain healthy for all those years. So she had a lot of protection coming into adulthood as a kid. But what was happening with her and other people who were doing this kind of intermittent fasting was that it was imposing a challenge to their cells. And their cells, in the body and the brain responded by getting stronger, enhancing their ability to cope with the stress and resist disease, which is why those, indigenous people were laughing, because then it helps enhance our ability to cope with stress and disease when we laugh and when we fast, right? This is how we evolved. Next slide, please. Outside, goes without saying. Let me just go to the next slide here. So in this slide here, it'll be our people here. You see them standing. These are my fellow tribesmen back in about 1903, standing there. They're singing to the cedar tree, singing a sacred song to the cedar tree. And they call her ahcâhk, mother who's coming to us. She's helping us. And it's a female, because back then they used to recognize the strength, power of the women. Not so much like today. I think we've forgotten a lot of that. We give it lip service, but we don't live it like they used to live it. And so when they sing to the tree, and they treat the tree as a real living being, sentient being, a mother, something incredible happens in their brain to their parietal lobe, as you see this on this image. You see where the red has kind of gotten all, you barely see any red there anymore. Different from the left side. This is the side of the brain that expresses for visual spatial reasoning, meaning that when this brain part is lit up in bright red, it means that the tree to them is the tree, but because they see the distance between them. But as they sing to the tree and the tree becomes alive to them, the distance between them and the tree shrinks and shrinks, and boom, they connect. They become one with the tree, one with the mother, one with the grandmother. Atipa, they say Atipa is grandmother in my language. And they connect. And when they connect, they become the tree becomes them. They become the branches, the leaves, the needles, the fragrance, the roots. And now we know how indigenous people connected to everything outside of them when they went through ceremony. They spent hours, days, weeks, months sometimes in prayer and in song until they quieted down this part of the brain and they made those connections. All the science shows us now that we share different genes with different plants and trees, different animals. We share genetic lines with everything around us, some closer, some not so close. This is what was connecting with these men at this time. Women did it too. This is just a picture I have of the men. So it's incredible when you think about how our people at times, did this. And now we have the imaging that shows exactly what was happening in the brain when they were engaging in these ceremonies. Next slide, please. Those are telomeres. Of course, they're lengthening. Of course, they feel good, right? They're doing ceremony. And as I said, remember, these are some of the first things that were taken from Indigenous people during the period of colonization. Next slide, please. Next slide. And again, next slide. These are just some of the things that happen in the brain waves. Next slide. And different parts of the brain get activated. I don't have enough time to talk about all this stuff, but just wanted to show you some examples. Next slide, please. And putting it all together, just push again, more advance. Okay. Okay. All right. Again, so brain waves, you see different parts of the brain being activated. On the lower left side, you see things like acetylcholine or endorphins or all the way over to serotonin. All these different things that are happening, the chemistry we need in our brain, right? We never think about that, how the chemistry has to be balanced in our brain. And what brings that chemistry into balance is, not only foods and living right and whatever, but also ceremony and engaging and all these things I've been talking about. Next slide, please. There's the telomeres, okay? So I want to end with these slides here. Everything I've been talking about, I had a chance to talk about everything, but when we talk about resilience, sometimes we say it without understanding where resilience lives. We now know from these studies that have been done, 12, 13 years ago now, that resilience lives in the prefrontal part of the cortex, in the underside of the brain. Cognitive resilience is the ability to overcome negative effects or stress on cognitive function, right? Bullet point number 2 is very important. Prior experience. Think of rites of passage. Think of things that the ancestors did and how they trained young people to laugh at pain, like these Indigenous people that we're talking about in 1636, or how they counted coup on death, how they stood up to trauma, how they made brave songs or warrior songs against fear, right? These are things they did that help activate that part of the brain, and they trained the people to do that. Because when you train these people to deal with high levels of stress and uncertainty, it does improve cognitive resilience. You see it activated there, when someone's resiliently coping. Next slide, please. So I'll end with this slide. The VMPFC, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. It's at the bottom of the mammalian brain and the prefrontal cortex. In the frontal lobe, between the two hemispheres. If you just put your finger between both your eyes, right where your nose begins, that's where your resilience lives. That's where, birth is given to all of that resilience when you go through rites of passage, not just one weekend, not just a couple of weekends, but when you go through life, day after day, you're challenged, right? You become bulletproof in a sense, right? It's implicated in the processing of risk and fear. You're able to process it, and you're able to manipulate it and deal with it. It plays a role in the inhibition of emotional responses. So think about that. When you look, and sometimes you see an Indigenous person, that may not be responding emotionally or something. It could be this part of the brain is activating, right? Back in the day when we were so into Western models and practice and science and counseling, we'd say, well, that person's in denial, they should be crying, right? We don't know that. This person may have a higher level of cognitive resilience, and maybe they emote very differently. We would know they would emote differently if they had gone through the training I'm talking about, the traditional training. It's also implicated in the process of decision-making and self-control. Finally, look at that. This is the last one, brings it all together. It's involved in the cognitive evaluation of morality, meaning that the people that participated in these kinds of ceremony and rites of passage became very, very moral. They had a moral sense of the universe, their place in the universe, their moral sense of treatment of all forms of life around them and one another. And they had this courage, compassion that existed, right? Again, these are things that exist in the here and now, but are not activated because we are no longer doing those kinds of ceremonies, but very easily could go back to activating that part of the brain once we turn back to doing some of those traditional practices and then doing them often. Singing many times a day, dancing many times a day, running and moving, right? Getting enough sleep, saying your prayers, sitting in a hot sweat lodge or a hot sauna for hours, 4 or 5 times a week, for 20, 30 minutes, whatever it takes, getting your body to challenge the stress, and then going without food like our ancestors did, fasting a bit. All these things are going to activate that part of the brain, the VMPFC. Okay, I'm going to end there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. There was so many things that were going through Terri and I's hearts and minds. And there was one point where you were talking, Michael, about the cells of mothers and how we carry the cells of our children far after, they've grown. And we both looked at each other and you said something along the lines of, take care of me. And I think we both immediately thought of our fathers who are residential school survivors. And then you started talking about that. And so I think it was a really good opportunity for me to think about, or for us both to think about, what happened to our parents' parents, what happened to our grandparents, what happened to our grandmothers when their children were forcibly removed from their homes to go to residential school. The way that you frame that allowed me to think about it in in a much deeper way. And so I want to say thank you for that, because I really think that hit us both. We're both sitting here crying, thinking about our grandmothers and how their cells, and they were still trying to take care of their babies.
We were trying not to look at each other either, so we wouldn't cry more. So we're both like this on the screen. Didn't want to see the tears in each other's eyes.
The tears came. My hope is that that gives other folks who are listening an opportunity to think about how our communities have been impacted, and how deep our communities have been impacted, and how when we're out practicing, as social workers specifically, that when we're out practicing with our folks, to be so mindful that there's no quick fix, that there is no checklist of, Western theory or models of practice that is going to make this go away. This is a long history of learning, unlearning, and teaching ourselves and others about how to do this well. But we do have some questions, and so I want to get to those. The first question we had is, what is the best approach for counseling for an individual that is receiving counseling or therapy from a framework or decolonization? So I'll read the next part of this. Would it be to primarily focus on an individual and to focus on neurodecolonization, or would it be to focus on collective relationships?
I think they're one and the same. Collective relationships are important. They're right in the same framework of neurodecolonization. Groups have power. That's why, people have had groups all the time. So I think, some individual counseling is good. I think it's good to kind of, get people in the bearings. But, what we learn is that, life is about an apprenticeship. We are all the apprentice of someone else, of some elder, some, very, very strong, healthy person. We apprentice all our lives. So or a group. This is why, Indigenous people had societies. Think about that. If you want to decolonize counseling, think about it that way. There's the time for the one-on-ones, but there's also the time for this healthy group, collectivist approach too as well. So,
yeah.
The other question that we had was, I'd be interested to read more about the intergenerational trauma on a cellular level, if you have any recommendations.
I don't. I'm coming upon all this information on my own, so I'm digging it up, and so I dig it up from paper after paper, and then I take that information and then I use it as a proxy to kind of explain what's happening with Indigenous people. So it's just a representation of like study that's been done on one group. I can say, oh, this is how it relates to Indigenous people. So yes. Hopefully I'll get my book. I'll get that done soon enough so people can read more about it. So.
Right, because you are coming out with a book, correct?
I am, yeah. So
good. Another comment I would like to make before we wrap up is, and we'll keep an eye on the Q&A. The other comment that I think is really important, because I get asked this all the time by my social work students, is around laughter and the use of laughter during, when we're working with folks. And it's interesting because I remember I was at a conference years ago and I was presenting at this international conference, and we were doing it in pairs. And so the person before me went up and did this presentation, and she was a trauma therapist, and she was talking about how laughter can be used as a tool of avoidance. Yeah. And I'm sitting there waiting to do my presentation. I'm like, oh crap, I'm gonna go up and totally contradict everything this person just said. So I went up afterwards and I started talking about traditional and more specifically Nehiyaw communities and how we use laughter as a healing practice. And we know this is true when we think about, again, our people who have jokes constantly and we're always joking around and teasing one another. And I think that that's a really important piece, is understanding that laughter in our communities is used and we say laughter is healing, but it really is. It's literally healing our brains. And so I think that's a really important piece that you bring out as well, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm going to take a look one more time. Okay. Is there any research out there regarding funeral ceremonies?
Yeah, there's a lot of research done on funeral ceremonies. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a particular question behind that, but yeah, there's a lot of, many cultures, funerary practices have been studied a lot, ancient ones to present day ones. So yeah, a lot of information.
Colleen, I understand mindfulness from a counselor who is Buddhist as being staying in the present. How does this fit into Indigenous terms?
Well, I think Indigenous people were very, very present-oriented people. But there comes a time, I think, when people, move through different cycles when they think about, it's important to remember 7 generations back, 7 generations forward. And Buddhists, I think that's kind of a misunderstanding, I think, of Buddhism, because, Buddhists don't always stay in the present moment. They look to ancient texts and ancient words, so they live in the past somewhat, and they have to think about the future. So I think, you have to dig a little deeper than that. It's just like all cultures have lived in the past and in the future. So I think it's important to remember that. And our ancestors left us a lot of clues about how to live, from the past, about how to live to take it to the future. The Mayan calendar was certainly that thing that, cycled after 5,000 years. It said, okay, there's a big change coming, for the future. So people look at that and they look at these long count, what they call a long count, and they figure out things from those kinds of things. So we have to think about, time, as real and maybe sometimes not real, but having all these different features about it that people use in different ways.
Yeah. There's another comment here, a comment and a question. The question is, how can museums take this information about trauma and put it into their decolonization practices when working with Indigenous people to build exhibits and programming?
I think, it's going to take a lot of effort to do that, I think, because I think what we've looked at now in terms of trauma, we've looked only at, the big picture. The kids, like if, I used to be a professor at Arizona State University. So right over in Phoenix, there's the Heard Museum, and they have a display of kids in residential school down there. All these kids and whatever, and you can go and look at it. It's it's very upsetting when you look at it. But what I'm talking about is that it's going to take a while for someone to build a brain of a kid and show what's happening in the brain and the body and the telomeres, what's happening, and how that level was happening too, so that people said, "Oh my God, I never knew that. I didn't even think about that they were being affected at such a deep level, and that we were actually manipulating the genetic profile of people." It's like, genetic, engineering at a particular level, right?
Right.
So, yeah, so it's going to take a while, I think, to kind of factor in those kinds of things.
So the next question we have is, how can we decolonize a nation when 70% of the nation is Caucasian?
Is what?
Is Caucasian.
Well, I think, the idea is what I'm showing people is that unless the 70%, is somehow immune from stress, they're somehow immune from, life. I think they have come to understand, that their ancestors, also have a very clear template that they live by. Their ancestors did a lot what our ancestors did. They danced, they sang, they fasted, they did ceremony. And if you look at them and you see that, they're not a healthy population, maybe they're a little healthier than you are. There's a clue there that, people need to decolonize their bodies and their minds from some of the things that they're doing, and stop outsourcing some of our own agency or autonomy to people we call professionals, like Western doctors or Western medicine and that kind of thing, and say, a lot of Western doctors talk about that now. Some of the stuff I'm getting comes from Western science, where they say that, hey, you don't need to take that pill, go for a run, do this or do that kind of thing. So all these things that are there, you're finding those in the Western science. Looks like maybe you guys didn't pay your bill there or something. So.
Remember earlier, Michael, when you were talking about dimming the lights, getting into,
it's that time.
the lights dimmed, and Terri literally got up and ran around the room.
Oh, okay, I got you. I thought you may have had a spirit in the room or something.
Well, probably some of those too. So we have a couple more questions, and I'm recognizing that we need to also consider your time as well, Michael. And so we'll get through a couple more. I think that Michael addressed maybe some of that first question, but the question is, could you speak on the decolonization of song and dance and the healing effects of reconnecting post-residential schools? And so do you feel like that you answered that one, or do you want to add a little bit more to that to help clarify?
Well, I think, decolonizing of dance, first of all, you have to recognize how important it is. And you have to recognize that you need to do it. I wish I had the link. There's a beautiful YouTube or TED Talk about this guy who has dystonia, and he dances, and he does this great talk on TED Talk. So and he and dystonia kind of gives you kind of rigidity and movement disorder and whatever, and he took up dance, and during the TED Talk, he showed how he got a dance teacher and a movement guy who was working with him, and he started dancing to Madonna's like Vogue, and he was like doing all the Vogue stuff. It was amazing how his body responded and what it did to bring him to a set point. What the body does, because it's not only just moving, it's releasing all these really important neurochemicals. Like I said earlier, your endocannabinoids are going up, brain-derived neurotrophic factors are going up. So you get these factors and these proteins that are all going into play. Your long-term potentiation of the brain as it's moving, is firing. And so you're developing a pattern that your brain's shifting away from an old pattern. It's like you're breaking out of this old one into something new, which is really cool, because when you look at Indigenous cultures, you see all these kinds of dances that exist. When I was a PhD student, some years ago, I was at Madison, and I lived in the territories of the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk Winnebago and of the Anishinaabe and different groups, Stockbridge, Munsee. And I used to go to all the powwows and all the dances, and man, they did all these dances. They did snake dances, all these. They did them all. I seen buffalo dances, eagle dances, bear dances, and in California and Alaska, and it's like amazing when you see that. But when you read the science of dance, you say, wow, now I know what was going on in their minds. I know it makes you feel good and it's really fun, or it's really serious and brings you to tears. But after that, you laugh and laugh. You understand what's going on with the body. And so to me, that's decolonizing dance, to say it's not just something that you do that came upon with this puritanical, kind of thinking that you don't dance because God's watching you and that's evil, your body's evil kind of thing. No, your body was meant to move. It was meant to, display. It was meant to, to draw attention to it, right? It was. It was.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it in the sense of a puritanical kind of ideology that says the body's dirty, it's evil, then you're not going to dance. It's kind of like, what's that show Kevin Bacon was in? Remember there was a show where they banned dance in the community?
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? It was a movie a long time ago. Anyway, it's like that. So that's decolonizing dance. Same thing with singing.
Footloose.
Little kids sing at school, but adults stop singing, right? Or, kids don't sing anymore. No one wants to sing unless it's in the shower or you're in James Cordain's, when you're driving along in the car and singing, in the Uber or whatever. But that's decolonizing singing and stuff, to realize that the benefits are just incredible and they're so natural. We evolved to do that. We have the brain hardware, we've got the joints, the bodies, we've got the curves, the muscle, everything that we need, that's how we express ourselves. You don't do it, you lose it. Use it or lose it, right?
Right.
You don't just lose it in the body, you lose it in the brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We will, we recognize that time is not our best friend right now. And we really would love to ensure that everyone's question is answered, but we also want to ensure that we are mindful of Michael's time. And so we're gonna.
I got a few more minutes if you want, if it's okay.
Sure. There's a question here from Alexander, and it says, as someone who is trying to get into medical school and become a physician, what would be the best approach to implement what you've discussed in your presentation? How can I contribute to decolonization as a physician?
Well, you have to forget about 50% of your medical education. It's true. You're going to learn things. You're never going to use again. I got a lot of friends who are MDs and relatives who are MDs, and I used to recruit MDs in one of my jobs back in North Dakota when I was a tribal health director. I think the thing, whoever asked the question, is to really think about functional medicine. Functional medicine, I think, is kind of the wave of the future, and also precision medicine is the wave of the future. Start learning about genetics and about genetic tests. Start learning about everything that's happening in neuroscience, the cutting edge neuroscience. And then I would really strongly recommend, if you're going into medical school, study evolutionary medicine, study evolutionary biology, study evolutionary psychology, and hopefully you'll be a very different doctor. You'll wing away from some of the very, very archaic, ineffective, dangerous ideas that medicine has right now. The over-reliance on pharmaceuticals, the over-reliance on outdated testing, the over-reliance on just treating people in the clinic. Doctors should treat people in the community. And you should be the best example. You should not be an overweight physician that eats terrible, doesn't get sleep. You have to be a role model for your patients. You know, I see that quite a bit. You know, your blood pressure should be perfect. So, I mean, seriously, I mean, you know, you're going to be, you know, given this authority and this voice, right? You want to use it well. That's decolonization. So,
Another question? Okay. So Megan is asking, as someone who is entering the healthcare field, I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for how healthcare workers can contribute, oh, I lost it here,
Right here.
to creating an environment that is culturally sensitive and hopefully addresses the issues of colonization and generational trauma. Are there any individual actions we could take to address this?
you know, I mean, I think it's important always to have with you, even though the person, say, let's speak English or whatever, French or Spanish or whatever, and you're a Spanish or French or English speaker, I think it's always good for a person to, when you deal with someone, you know, to have an interpreter. I'm not talking about a language interpreter. I'm talking about an emotional interpreter. I'm talking about a body interpreter. I'm talking about someone who can enhance, you know, an understanding of who a person is. You know, I mean, that's the problem, I think, with Western medicine and Western healthcare, is that it treats everybody as an individual. You may go in with your mother or your auntie or your grandma and be able to give the provider a ton of more information than she could remember or she would, you know, even want to talk about. So think of interpreter in a much broader sense. You know, you have to interpret sometimes for people, right? So I think that's, and then I think you'll see where the cultural sensitivity or cultural awareness begins to happen. You know, because not everybody's going to want, you know, to be treated one way or another. It could be that some person's individual choices may override, you know, a cultural kind of need that they have at the moment. But they may want to come back to it at some time. So.
We'll take one more and then we are going to finish off with another song. So stick around if you want to get up and dance and sing.
Amber's going to sing a song.
Terry's going to dance. I'm going to sing. How do we take what you've presented today and apply it to our modern lives? We have challenges and responsibilities that our ancestors did not have to contend with. With all of our modern advances that have changed the world, how can we possibly revert back to more ancient practices?
Well, it's difficult. I'll give you that. It can be done. It's management about time, right? Do I find time to dance every day? No, I don't, but I dance. I'll dance. Do I find time to sing every day? No, I don't, but I'll sing. Do I fast every day? Well, yes, I do. I do some things every day, right? So it becomes part of a ritual. And when you're better at your ritual, sometimes it makes you better at the Western world, you know, or more efficient, right? You have to remember that, you know, these things can be fit in. You have to find out what's practical for you to do and do as many as you can. Run, dance, sing, sleep well, go to bed right time, fast when you can, sit in a hot sauna or go to a sweat lodge so many times a week, be outside in the sun for, you know, if you can't do it for 2 hours, be out there for 15 minutes, but do it, you know, just keep on doing it and you'll see some of those changes start to happen. The other thing to remember is really important is that every time you don't do it and you have a moment to do it means that the colonization has taken hold, right? Decolonizing means stepping outside of that place. Decolonizing means, you know, you have some resistance to being controlled and manipulated by, you know, the so-called modern world, right? The modern world is killing us. It's killing all of us, not Indigenous people. You know, it's really doing a lot of damage. So that's what I would recommend. Find the time. I mean, I get up early enough to run my 4 miles today. In between meetings on my Zoom, I stretch, I lift weights, I do push-ups, during lunch, I'll take out my guitar, or I'll take out my tenor saxophone and I'll play that. You know, I go inside, I'll dance with my daughters a little bit, and you know, and then just try to do it every day. You know? Try to do it every day.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Michael. We really appreciate you sharing your stories and your knowledge with all of us today. We're just very thankful that you were able to join us here at MacEwan University, and also those who are joining us from Blue Quills University. I am going to pull up a slide here just in regards to the interdisciplinary project. Give me 1 second. So we do have another forum that is coming up on March 18th at 5 o'clock, and this is creative responses to crisis. And so we do have a number of panelists who will be joining us. There will be a link, so you are invited to, all of those who are joining us tonight, you're all invited to join us on March 18th. As we wrap up, do you have any closing comments for Michael? We're also going to be closing off with another song, a celebration song in closing this session today, and it's with Leo and Priscilla McGilvery and Joel Wood, featuring Joel Wood as well. Do you have any closing?
Just thank you. I always learn something new when I hear you speak, or when I read any of the work that you've done. There was another question around the name of your book. Do you have a name for your new book, Michael?
Well, it's called Minding the Indigenous Mind. It's stories of healing, resilience, and the mic in the brain or something. The title's kind of working, but yeah, Minding the Indigenous Mind. I just want to say this too, that I looked at the chat real quick and somebody wrote Footloose, Footloose, Footloose. That was the name. That was the name of the movie that Kevin Bacon was in. Yeah. So were they band dancing, right? So, thank you, whoever wrote that. So.
Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful. So happy to again see Terri and Dion, and to be with these two Crees in a pod here. So I really respect them a lot in their work and what they do. So, and thank you to everyone else too that made this possible. Cheyenne, Jody, Larissa, and is it Crystal? I think. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone else, but thank you so much for the invitation and for moving things along. And thank you to all the audience and participants.
Thank you.
And we will pull up the song for you all right now.
So get up and dance.
Good.